I'm reinventing myself. I'm me and nobody else. Ooh, I can't help but smile.
So hello everybody and welcome to another one of these things. I hope you're all well. I'm well here. It's a little bit hot right now. I usually have to turn off my AC to shoot these episodes because, you know, the AC is not good for audio. But it's a little bit warm in Toronto right now. I mean, it's not warm like crazy warm like it is in other places in the world currently. My sister is in Southern California. She says it's like lava hot out there. First thing I want to do is address the title of this video. You know, APS-C better than full frame? Well, clearly I'm just trying to get your attention. There's something I'd like to draw some attention to, and that's the fact that there is a place for APS-C camera bodies even in the bags of professionals, you know, regardless of whether they've got 1 or 2 card slots, okay? But bear with me, right? Because, you know, I love 2 card slots like, you know, the next person. You know, it's nice to have redundant recording. I mean, I'd love to have, you know, 2 card slots in every camera. I'm shooting with the FX30 right now. One of the reasons I bought this camera is because it has 2 card slots. Clearly, I didn't buy this camera for a full frame sensor because the FX30 has the sensor in the new A6700, which is a reason that I'm making this video as well. So that camera's already been in the hands of reviewers, and, you know, like everybody else, you know, I've been watching those reviews. And it always raises questions whenever a new APS-C camera comes out, just like it did with the FX30. You know, is that APS-C format, is it pro? What I want to tell you right now is there are all kinds of pros out there shooting with APS-C cameras. Not just in the world of cinema where, you know, crop sensors have been a thing for a very long time. There are like a lot of feature films that you've gone out to see on the big screen that have been shot with a crop sensor. You know, in the world of photography, certainly APS-C has its place as well. And I just want to go over some of those things, both for photo and video, why APS-C might want to make its way into your camera bag for an amateur, serious amateur, or professional, regardless of whether the body has a single card slot or not, and regardless of cost even, although cost is clearly a factor for most of us. So as people often look at APS-C cameras as an upgrade over full frame, I want to point out reasons why you might want to either stick to APS-C or even move from full frame to APS-C like I have. I kind of go back and forth between the two, so I'm not some full frame hater and I'm certainly not an APS-C hater. If you're interested in APS-C cameras, especially compact light cameras, you're not necessarily going to find a camera that has dual card slots. There are of course many options to cover your bases. You know, I'm from the world where I started with film. We didn't have backups, you know. If someone had a backup in the film world, they had 2 camera bodies on, you know, around their neck, and they certainly weren't shooting every photo twice, just so they had redundant film. Of course, there are people who are shooting with the Canon 7D Mark I, you know, and for like over a decade, you know, some people shooting some pretty high-profile stuff with those cameras. 1 card slot, right? Of course, we would have all loved to have more than 1. Have I had, you know, cards fail? I mean, actually, no, I've never had a card fail on me in camera. I think there was a firmware thing that Sony had once with like the A6400, which could cause some issues, and there was some weirdness going on there with that camera when I used to own that, which you know, I still didn't lose anything. And there was only one other time, and I'm talking about since, you know, the dawn of digital photography, which I've been part of the entire time. I have only had 1 real issue with a card, and it was completely recoverable. And it wasn't even something that happened in the camera. It was actually while I was backing up a card, believe it or not. I'm pretty sure that it was like a cable that was no good going to the card reader. You know, things certainly do happen. That's why, you know, it is nice having 2 card slots. But even in that case, that card was 100% recoverable through some recovery software. Anyway, okay. Super long-winded. I'm always doing this, right? So some of you may be familiar with Chelsea and Tony Northrup. They've got a channel that kind of leans toward photography more. They do cover some video stuff because they do, you know, very thorough reviews of cameras. Not like Gerald Undone thorough reviews like technical or anything like that necessarily. But they do some great reviews on cameras, but they're kind of more on the photography side. But when they do review a camera, like they've recently reviewed the A6700, what they'll do is they'll throw, their wildlife lenses on them, and they'll go out in the field and shoot some birds. The reason being, APS-C cameras, for, like everybody, including professionals, are popular with the wildlife people, because you're getting that extra reach. You can take a 400 and make it a 600, or 600 and make it a 900. I shoot with a 70 to 300. I bought the 70 to 300 Tamron. I've covered that lens on this channel. I actually sold my Sony 70 to 300 G lens to buy the Tamron, because the Tamron is like half the weight, and optically just as sharp, in my opinion. I don't know that real specs on that, but it's a beautiful lens. So it's one of the lightest full frame telephoto lenses in that range that you can buy. And the reason I went with full frame is because I go between APS-C and full frame. For those of you who don't know, you don't want to buy an APS-C lens and then stick it on your full frame camera, but you can go the other way quite often without issue, usually. So I invested in a full frame lens on the telephoto side, so I could use it both on full frame and on APS-C. If you're an APS-C shooter and want to stick to APS-C, don't have a full frame body, don't intend on using your long lens for on a full frame body, look at the Tamron 18 to 300 instead. You're getting a lot more range, and I think it's roughly the same weight as the lens I've got. I love it, but I was able to save half the weight. Me, I like traveling with my stuff, and even when I'm not traveling with my stuff, even if I'm doing a gig here, like for a client, I don't want to carry a bunch of stuff. Recently using this camera, my FX30, on a job, and it was fantastic, because I was able to cut down a lot of weight. More on that later. I'm going to bring up some of the stuff in the second part of this, but the first part is the wildlife stuff. So one other thing that can make those wildlife lenses heavy is, if you are a professional, you may need a fast wildlife lens. Me, I usually shoot in full broad sunlight and all that. I don't need a constant f2.8, and even at higher frame rates, if you're out in broad daylight, you're usually okay with one of the slower lenses. And you do save a lot of weight there too, because the glass gets big and heavy when you're going with those constant f2.8s. So number 2 reason why APS-C is better than full frame. I hate generalizations like that. I used one in the title, it's a bit controversial. People are like, what's this guy talking about, APS-C being better than full frame? Well, it's all based on use case, right? And I'm trying to get your attention, because I want to draw attention to the fact that APS-C sometimes really is better than full frame. No, it is sometimes better than going full frame. I mean, there are advantages of shooting APS-C sometimes over full frame. The whole AI chip in the A6700, what it can do as far as wildlife and sports goes, amazing. I don't want to get into like the burst rate. Yeah, sure, it shoots only 11 FPS, and there are Fujis out there shooting 15 FPS, or whatever your argument may be for Canon or Fuji or whatever. That's a whole other thing. But the 6700 is obviously going to be a camera that's going to be fantastic for wildlife and sports. So what is this other reason why one might want to buy a APS-C camera over full frame camera? Not quite as obvious as on the long end, and that is actually the advantages of shooting wide on an APS-C over a full frame. How does that make any sense, right? You're talking about going with a smaller sensor to shoot wide? Why? Well, it comes down to lens availability. About lenses, and let's just jump back. Let's just digress a little bit to the whole cost thing. This lens here from Sigma, the 16mm f1.4, probably the most popular APS-C lens on the planet. Even I I'd venture to say even for the Micro Four Thirds people, probably one of the most popular lenses, on the planet. I've got, friends that are shooting video professionally with this almost exclusively. I wouldn't necessarily do that. This is a beautiful lens. Optically, it's awesome. The focus is great. It's not a new lens. This came out in 2017. Sigma's got a few of these. They're all marked with numbers to denote when they actually came out. They just came out with a 23mm that I actually smashed. It's not a cheap lens. It's the most expensive out of what's now a Quattro. For years it was a trio. Now there's 4 of them, and the last one was a 23mm, and I dropped it. APS-C lenses aren't always that affordable, and they're not always that light. This is actually a pretty heavy lens. This is over 400 grams. If you want to reduce the weight of your camera kit, you may want to look at Sony's new 15mm f1.4. It's a G lens. It's not cheap. In Canadian dollars, it's over 900 bucks. I'll throw the US price in here somewhere. And this guy you can get for under $300 right now, like used. The Sony lens, you're gonna have to buy it new because it's still relatively new. It just came out recently, so you're not gonna necessarily find one on the used market. It's a 15mm, so you're gaining a little bit. It's a little bit wider, and it's half the weight of this lens. Unfortunately, it is not a cheap lens. So going APS-C, a lot of it all depends on the choices you make for lenses, whether or not you're gonna have a lighter kit. So lens choice and your decisions when it comes to that is definitely something that factors into the whole APS-C argument. But there's also lens availability, and let me show you something here. This lens here, the Laowa 9mm f2.8. I've spoken about this lens before on the channel. Now, the reason why this lens is a bit of a game changer for people like myself, okay, I've been shooting photographs professionally with my FX30. What's supposed to be an entry into the cinema world is a camera that I've been using for shooting photos professionally. A little more on that in a sec. This is an f2.8 9mm, which is the full frame equivalent of a 13.5mm. If you want to get into that territory on a full frame camera, you're talking about a G Master lens. You're talking about the Sony 12 to 28 GM lens. If you want to go that fast. Sony's got a G lens, but that only opens up to as big as f4. That is a compelling reason why you may want to shoot APS-C. Now, Sony has their 11mm, which is a fantastic lens, but obviously you're not going to get as wide as that. Now, the downside of this lens is the fact that it's a manual focus lens. Not a big deal because, for me, for instance, I was shooting architectural stuff with the FX30. I was doing HDRIs, so longer exposures on a tripod. So I wasn't even taking advantage of that f2.8 because I had this thing stopped down to f8, between f8 and f11, and everything razor sharp, of course, because this is a sharp optic, but I'm at infinity because I'm at that end of the aperture range, right? In Canadian dollars, you're looking at like 500 bucks or something like that, the US equivalent down here again. And one of the other advantages of this is the screw-on filters. You can't do that with those bulbous, elements that you find in lenses like the GM lens, or even a more affordable lens like the Samyang 14mm on full frame. Now, for landscape people like wide angle lenses, and they're a group who would look at a lens like this. The filter frame kits that those people often will use. Filter frames are often used for graduated NDs. Those are the NDs that have to be oriented a certain way because they go from dark at the top to light at the bottom. Those keep your your clouds from getting blown out and things like that. Those filter kits are big, they take up a lot of room. You're throwing out the advantages of APS-C system anyway if you're carrying around a filter kit. I mean, your kit may be lighter, but it's going to be cumbersome anyway if you're carrying around one of those filter frame kits, and there's a cost definitely associated with those. Myself personally, and my opinions on those graduated NDs, sure, it's great doing everything in camera. Some will argue a case for that, but with sensors the way they are right now, in post you can bring back so much of the detail in the skies and stuff like that. I mean, that's the reason they're using those. They want to blow out their skies, but with one of these you can do screw-on filters, which means you can have your circular NDs on here and polarizers and what have you. Just screw them on the front, and that's a nice thing about that Sony too, the 11mm. The only downside is, of course, you're going at 11mm as opposed to 9. And every millimeter counts when you're talking about wide-angle lenses. Anyway, I hope you guys got something out of this one. If you guys like the sound, by the way, in this video, I'm using audio right now. That's with 2 eyes, by the way. The YouTuber, the documentarian, and fellow Canadian, Luke Forsyth, he's been using audio for a while. He's the one who put me on audio, watching his channel, and I used his discount code to get 70% off audio. If you guys would like to get 70% off of your subscription to audio, and if you do like the music in this, if you don't, that's fine, don't subscribe. But if you want to save yourself 70%, you can use the link in the description of this video to save yourself that money. And some of the other products I've talked about, there are Amazon affiliate links now that I'm including in my video because I'd like to do more of this stuff. And the only thing is there's obviously associated costs, and if you want to support the channel, it's much appreciated. If you're going to buy this stuff anyway, through Amazon, or consider using my affiliate links. That would be greatly appreciated. Anyways, if you don't want to miss any of these in the future, please consider subscribing. If you got something out of this, please leave it a thumbs up. If not, that's okay too. Until next time, keep working to make your chosen idea reality. Peace.